look at a conversational look is what I want to say at our mirrorless cameras, both the smaller sensor size and the big large format sensor size. And it's either for those of you who are already Fujifilm camera owners and want to know a little bit more, or you're from something else and are, been hearing great things about us and want to know if you should switch or not. So we're going to switch to a presentation in a few seconds, but Lewis and I basically, if you guys really feel you have an important question, feel free to put it in the chat. This is not meant to be a deep, learning thing about everything about the cameras. This is only going to be an hour long. 10 days from now, on Saturday the 8th, we are going to do a 90-minute, possibly almost 2-hour long deep learning thing about going into everything you want to know about our menus and how things work with our cameras. So that is basically geared for people that are Fujifilm users. If you're not a Fujifilm user, you may or may not get what we're talking about, but it will give you an idea of where our performance levels lie. So I am going to start the show here, and so you guys have probably seen this logo. We've been using it for a few years because, as we were chatting earlier, things have changed a lot in the world of photography. Come on. So just to let you know, we as a company have been around for almost 90 years. So our first product was motion picture film. And we still make film today, of course, and we started doing cameras in 1948. But the root of everything that drives Fujifilm is the history of making film. We are the only camera manufacturer out there right now, digital camera manufacturer, that has a legacy in film. Nobody else can say that. And that informs our science, that informs our engineering, that informs our philosophy about photography. So we have two systems. They are the X series and the GFX system. They really got started about 10 years ago. And right from the get-go, we got huge accolades for having a really classic design. And again, that comes back from the old legacy that we have of making film, that we appreciate the cameras from yesteryear. So we've designed cameras that feel and function like good old-fashioned film cameras with really high performance digital aspects to them. This is a smattering of what the X series is about. I know the X Pro 3 is on there twice. That's a mistake. A couple of the cameras have been discontinued recently, but this just gives you an idea of sort of what we're talking about for those of you that haven't seen our cameras before. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tech. We have a completely unique sensor that we use in most of our X series cameras. Now, not all of them use what's called the X-trans sensor, but most of them do. And we'll explain a little bit more about that. We have our own mount for lenses, as do all the other camera manufacturers. But these days, it's very easy to adopt one thing to another from cross systems, and a lot of people do that. And we have two different lens systems. We have a lesser expensive and a higher quality lens system. So they are all mirrorless. Everything we make now is mirrorless. So we have not made a DSLR in over 10 years. And so there's a lot of advantages to mirrorless, and this is for those of you who haven't tried it yet. Lewis and I were just on a photo walk this afternoon, and some people that were testing some of our cameras that had DSLRs with them were really amazed at what they could get. So you get, if you use just the EVF, you get less power consumption. But the main thing about mirrorless is basically it's what you see is what you get. When you put it up to your eye, if it's too bright, it's too dark, you're going to see it right away. If you want to shoot black and white images, you put the camera into black and white mode, you get a black and white image on the screen, which is extremely helpful for your brain, to train your brain, and extremely helpful with composition. by seeing the picture sort of in real time, it helps you feel whether there's any shake in there. You get 100% corner-to-corner coverage. DSLRs do not give you mostly 100% because the mirror, they make the mirror smaller than 100% in order to save space, so you don't actually get that. You get maybe 93 to 95% coverage. You can see things on the screen like a level. And it's really cool with the EVF when you're out at the beach like we were yesterday. You can play back images and put it up to your eye, and you can see playback in the viewfinder instead of on the LCD screen, which is a pain when you're in bright conditions. All right, so the X-Trans sensor, it is a CMOS. Pretty much everybody's using CMOS these days, not CCDs. But this was something that we originated 10 years ago. And it came from film thinking. I'm going to show you the details in a second. But as of this year, we're on the 4th generation of that sensor. No other camera manufacturer uses this sensor, okay? And it's in most of our APS-C cameras, in particular the X Pro 3, the E4, the 100V, the S10, the T30, the T4. So this is what makes it different. It's the way the red, green, blue filter array is used on that sensor. So if you look at the bottom, everybody else uses something called a bare filter array. And the downside of the bare filter array is the pattern repeats every 2 pixels. It's the same pattern every 2 pixels. We came from a film standpoint, and so I'll explain. There is a downside to that. You get something called moire, and there's a way to deal with moire on bare filter arrays that degrades the image. Well, we looked at film technology and the randomness of grain, and we figured out a way to make the red, green, blue array look more like random film grains. So as you can see, it's a completely different layout, and the repeatability of the array is every 6 pixels. And that has a very significant advantage with resolutions from 30 megapixels down. So with the bare filter array, camera manufacturers, in order to do away with something called aliasing, and in particular something called the moire look, and if you don't know what moire is, please put it in the chat there. We'll answer it for you right now live. But they put a low pass filter in front of their sensors. By low pass, that means it blocks certain high frequencies of light, okay? I don't mean of light, of the pattern, of the image. So the result is you get a softening of the image, and that's necessary in order to not get the moire. The CMOS X-Trans sensor, because of that less repeatable pattern, is virtually impervious to moire. So because of that, we do not need to use a low-pass filter. We don't use a low-pass filter on any of those cameras. And as a result, we get actually a sharper image. We get more resolution out of the lenses than you can by using a bare array. We have really, really good autofocus. So we currently have a combination of phase detect pixels and contrast detect pixels on our cameras, with the exception of 2 of the large format cameras, which we'll explain in a bit. But we use a hybrid autofocus system. So you use phase detect to get the lens to move quickly to where it's predicted to be, and then we use contrast detect to dial it in exactly to the sharpness that it needs to be. We are able to do continuous autofocus at a shooting rate of up to 30 frames a second. Yes, all right, we have cameras that will do 30 frames a second in still mode. And also, the logic circuits built into our cameras are very, very good with face detection and eye detection. So you can do single, point autofocus, you can do zone focus, you can do wide tracking autofocus, where the camera will follow the subject from one corner of the screen all the way to the other automatically. Really, really very good, reliable autofocus. So I mentioned already our, proprietary X mount. So the good thing about mirrorless cameras is because you don't have that mirror that needs to go up and down, you can make the camera really small. It can be really flat. And the distance from the mount of the lens to the sensor is called the flange depth distance. So it's very, very short, which means the optics are optimized to give us as much light gathering capability as possible, all right, and increases the resolution. So our flange depth is 17.7 millimeters on the X mount. Now, just anecdotally, I should point out, this is virtually identical to Sony's mirrorless flange depth as well. That means there is no way to adapt Sony mirrorless lenses to our cameras, and you can't adapt our lenses to Sony cameras because the adapter ends up pushing the lens too far out and it won't work. However, that super shallow flange depth means that you can adapt any lens that's made for a DSLR or big, 120 film format camera, because that effectively those adapters push the lens out. So we have that super shallow flange depth. So pushing the lens out is not a problem because they were built for cameras that have a deeper flange depth to begin with. So just historically, back in 1954, the first three lenses in our Fujinon brand, okay, the first camera lenses that we introduced were a 35 f2, a 50 1.2, and a 100 f2. And you can see that design, all right, from 1954. And the first lenses that we made for the X series 10 years ago were based on those three lenses. Now, they're not the exact same focal lengths, but we use those as a platform with which to build our current lens line on. So this is just sort of a smattering of what our prime lenses look like. Okay, we have a lot. So I'm just showing you an idea. We've got pancake lenses. We have 1.4s, we have 2.8s. Those three, the 14, the 16, the 23, I'm showing you are interesting because they have an autofocus to manual sliding lens clutch. So when that ring in the front is pushed forward, the lens is in autofocus, you pull it back, and now it's in manual focus. So you don't even have to worry about flipping levers on the camera or anything like that. It's a really, really clever design. And you can see they have depth of field markings on them and stuff like that. So the 27 millimeter that I have on the slide is actually our first generation. We have a new one that came out a few months ago that is actually less expensive. The $399 is the current price for the new lens, but unfortunately I have a picture of the old one on there. But the new one actually has an aperture ring. And that's another thing, is our retro design is almost every lens we make has an f-stop ring on the lens itself. You can use camera wheels to change f-stop if you want. There's a way to set things up in the menus to do that if that's what you're used to, if you're switching from Nikon, Canon, or something else. But we do have that good old school f-stop aperture ring on the lenses. Zooms, we've got a bazillion zooms. These are the most popular. The 1855 2.8, that's actually a 2.8 f4. I'm sorry, it's a typo on my end. Is the most popular kit lens, so a lot of the bodies come with that lens bundled in. But our 1655 flat 2.8 is a pro level lens. It's much sharper. The focus is faster than the 1855. The 50 to 140 is a big time favorite with fashion, portrait, wedding photographers. It's fantastic. That is also not a 3.5. That's a 2.8. I apologize. We make $100,000 movie lenses. These are $4,000 movie lenses. So these are actually purpose built for the X series cameras. They are true 100% all mechanical, all manual cinema, pro cinema lenses. Absolutely, they're parfocal. They have no chromatic aberration. They have no focus breathing. Like I said, they're in the $4,000 price range, but our X series cameras do such phenomenal video that we took what knowledge we have from the high end, $50 to $100,000 cinema zooms and made these compact zooms instead. They're really good, and this is what they look like when you mount it on an XT3 or an XT4 with a cage. So I don't have all of them listed there, but as of right now, we have 30 of our own lenses in our lineup. Now, you'll see some different designations. There's the XF series and the XC series. Most of our lenses are the XF series, and they are a stronger build quality. Optically, there's very little, if any, difference between some of the XF and some of the XCs, but the XC lenses are a couple $100 less expensive. The autofocus is not as fast on the XC, but it's decent. But they all have plastic lens mounts. So the XCs are great if you're going to get yourself one or two lenses and basically stick with that, if you're not going to be swapping lenses too much. But if you are going to be swapping lenses a lot, you really should get yourself an XF, because they do have full metal flanges, and that way they're not going to wear out on you. But the XCs are also much lighter, but they're less expensive, but they don't have quite the high performance spec as the XF. But there's not a lot of XC lenses. That's the difference. If you want to go to this website, we publish our lens roadmap. It's on our website for you to see what we're working on in the future. Of course, there's always new stuff under development that our engineers in Japan are doing that we don't know about, but we are constantly evolving, constantly moving stuff forward. Does anybody have any questions about sort of what we talked about with the X series lineup at this point? There is more coming on that, but do we have any questions, Louis?
No questions at the moment.
Okay, good. Okay, so GFX is the system that we came out with. That goes back about 4 years ago. This is large format digital. So we say more than full frame because that's exactly it. It is bigger than 35 millimeter full frame. There are 4 cameras in that system. So there's two 51.4 megapixel cameras, and there's 202 megapixel cameras. The newest one is the second one from the left. It's the GFX 100S, which is this. You can see, compared to my hand, it literally fits in my hand. I have put this next to DSLRs, APS-C DSLRs, full frame DSLRs, and so far it's been smaller than every one I've put it next to. Yet these things have monstrously big sensors. I'll show you what that cool sensor looks like. Not that you can tell over Zoom, but that is a nice big sensor. Okay. What do you get with that? So why is it large format? So a lot of people, are saying it's medium format. We even sometimes use the term medium format. Medium format is a film term. So medium format, everything was bigger than 35 millimeter still film. And then you went to sheet film. You had 4x5 sheet film was the big stuff, and 8x10, 5x7. Well, what was in between was medium, 120, 220 film. Okay, so 645, 6x6, 6x8, 6x9, that's all medium format film. There are no medium, there's nothing 4x5 and 8x10 in digital. So this is the biggest you can get. This, family of sensors is the biggest you can get right now in digital. So that's why we call it large format. So the sensor area is 60% larger than full frame film. Okay, full frame digital sensors, 60% larger. So that means we can pack more pixels into that, but not only that, but the equivalent pixel size is also bigger than you get on a smaller sensor. And pixel size does mean better signal to noise. So the GFX system does have its own native mount, the G mount. We're going to talk about lenses again about then, but there are a lot of adapters available. So you can use a whole lot of legacy medium format film lenses on the GFX system cameras. However, you may not get autofocus. And we use some of the best processor we make, and they all have viewfinders. So the GFX 50S was the first one that came out for this system. And it was followed about a year after that by the GFX 50R. And so the 50S and the 50R have very different body designs, as you can see. The R was meant to be a rangefinder style camera. So it is EVF only. Again, these are all electronic viewfinder only, but the viewfinder is on the upper left corner of the camera body. So it's like holding, this is an X Pro 3, so it's like holding a rangefinder camera in this, but it's in a large format. But they have the same sensor, the same processor. There is a price difference between them because the GFX 50S has the addition of putting a vertical battery grip on to give you a vertical shutter button as well. The 50R can't do that, so you can get 2 batteries on the 50S. You can't do that with the 50R. The viewfinder is removable on the 50S, which gives you the option of using a 45-90 degree angle tilt adapter. So which is very, very handy when you're shooting low to the ground. And it has a 3-way tilt screen instead of a 2-way tilt screen. So that's the differences between those two cameras. In terms of video, these are the 100 megapixel cameras. So the first 102 megapixel camera we launched is the GFX 100, and then the GFX 100S just came out on the market about 6 weeks ago. So there is a substantial price difference between those two, even though they have the same sensor and the same processor. Again, there are body differences between those. So I'll show them to you in a second, but they all have hybrid autofocus. So these are 102 megapixel cameras with super fast phase detect, corner to corner, the entire sensor, autofocus, face detection. They do cinema 4K 10-bit video. They have dual card slots, okay? The GFX 100, though, however, is a larger body. It has an integrated vertical grip. It also has the removable EVF and a slightly higher res EVF. So this is what the difference looks like in the body. So the body size and design between the 100S and the 100 is actually quite noticeable. But as you can see, it has on the one on the left, the 100 has the built-in vertical grip. So if you do a lot of portraits, that might be something you want to consider because there's a vertical shutter button and it has a vertical thing. So the 100S, you're going to have to hold it this way. There is no battery grip option available for the 100S, period. The 100S also uses a different battery than the GFX 100. So it's a slightly better battery. However, you can only get one at a time. So that's, again, something to consider. If you are a wedding shooter, on the one hand, you might like the lighter portability of the 100S. But on the other hand, the GFX 100 will have 2 batteries in it, so it will give you longer shooting time without having to do any swaps. These are the different factors. Also, the in-body image stabilization unit, they both have it, but the one that's in the 100S was re-engineered from the GFX 100. Is actually a little bit better. Even though it's smaller and slimmer, it's actually slightly better than the GFX 100. So the optics. So we have, again, a phenomenal set of optics for these cameras. The primes go from a wide 23 millimeter to a long 250. And with the 250, there's also a 1.4 teleconverter. So there's a 20% down factor when you're comparing these to 35 millimeter. So the 23 is a 18 millimeter equivalent on 35 millimeter film. The 250 millimeters, a 200 millimeter equivalent on 35 millimeter film. We've got 9 primes. We have 3 zooms right now. We've just introduced an incredibly fast 80 millimeter 1.7 lens. Okay, so let that sink in. We're talking about a 1.7 lens for a giant sensor camera. We also have the 110 millimeter f2. And the prices on the lenses is extremely reasonable. They're like $999 to $3,200. So for big format optics, if you compare to other camera makers, it's much more affordable. So this is sort of what the prime lens optic lineup looks like. And again, we have a roadmap for that as well. So feel free to go to our website and check out what the lens roadmap is. So going a little deeper now into some of the individual stuff about how our systems actually operate. We thought we'd spend a little bit of time on the X100V in particular. This is it. I'm holding it. And so the first camera in the X series lineup was the X100. That's all it was called, the X100. So the X100V, V stands for 5. This is the 5th version of this camera since the original one came out 10 years ago. So all of them are a fixed lens. It's a fixed 23 millimeter f2 that has a leaf shutter. Okay, so it has a leaf shutter and an electronic shutter option, whereas the other X series and the GFX have focal plane shutters. This one has a leaf shutter. What's cool about that is not only is it like whisper quiet, even in mechanical shutter mode, but with the leaf shutter, you can actually do high-speed sync with any dumb flash. It doesn't have to be a smart flash to do high-speed sync. This is a really super cool camera to be using for things like skateboarding and snowboarding or action BMX or something like that. But again, it is a fixed 23 millimeter f2, an f2 that's really fast. So this is a phenomenal street camera, phenomenal journalism camera, phenomenal camera to travel around the world with. It is really slim and skinny. It will fit in your pocket quite easily. Now, the 100V, when this came out, I guess about a year ago, was it, Louis?
About a year ago, yes.
Yeah. They changed the lens because we upped the sensor quality on this. We went to the 26 megapixel sensor on here, and the original 23 millimeter lens that was on the first 4 versions of the camera, this wasn't quite sharp enough for that resolution. So the 100V got a better lens. It also got a better viewfinder. So it does internal 4K video up to 330 frames per second. 200 megabit rate is really high quality data rate. And you can do high speed HD. You can do 120 frames per second HD on this little camera. The electronic shutter will let you go up to 32 thousandths of a second. And this has a built-in neutral density filter. Why? Because of that f2 and because it's a non-removable lens. So if you want to shoot wide open at f2 in the bright sun, you can just turn on the internal ND and be able to get a better shutter speed if you want to, have a little bit of motion blur. It's a very, very cool camera, and it's $1,400. So the price on this camera actually has stayed the same for all the years, $1,399. So, but the number one thing that makes this camera, and I should say the X Pro 3, similar and 100% unique from everything else on the market. So if you look in the corner, see if I can, not sure you can see it. So there is an optical window here. And if you can see on your screen, you can actually see the light, the skin from my forehead coming through that optical window. Okay, it's a pass-through optical window. So you have a 100% optical finder on here. And when you turn it on, we project the camera information by way of a prism onto that optical screen. So you get you know, the frame lines, and you get camera data, and you get where your AF point is on there, and still have a completely perfect flickerless optical view that doesn't involve a mirror. So it is a rangefinder style, but we do build in parallax correction. So as you move closer and closer, the frame actually shifts to show you what the actual capture is going to be. And the way you can flip it into electronic viewfinder anytime you want with the lever on the front. So this lever, a lot of people look at it, it looks like an old school self-timer from film cameras. It's not. It's actually that flips the view from optical to pure electronic viewfinder. So this camera gives you the best of both worlds. Now you do pay a little extra compared to, say, just one of the EVF cameras. So this one is $13.99. The X Pro 3 is $19.99. This one, the X Pro 3, is an interchangeable lens version of the X100V. So the X Pro 3 or X Pro 2, X Pro 1, they take the same lenses as all the other X series camera, but it has the same viewfinder. So they are very, very interesting cameras. You should check them out if that sounds, you know, appetizing. So like I said, here's it shows you what the parallax correction is. I personally have never liked real film rangefinder cameras. You know, I've been shooting since I was a kid, like 10 years old, but you got to focus on this little tiny little like yellow box in the middle. Some people love it and have no quarrels with them whatsoever. I have always personally hated rangefinder cameras. So having an the electronic ability to do something and focus clearly on the screen is very helpful. I should back up. I forgot to show you. If you look in the bottom right of this slide, you will see the optical view, and then on the bottom right of the optical viewfinder, you can actually get an electronic projection that's a magnified part of the image. So if you look at that little black and white image, is where the focus point is. So you can move the focus point around, and that electronic image will follow the focus point. So this gives you a way to focus manually using an electronic image and still have an optical view. Absolutely nobody else in the world does this. I'm going to talk about the color fidelity. So again, because we are a film company, so you can, of course, stick to a pure raw workflow if you want, but anybody that has switched to our cameras will tell you that they find themselves using raw files less and less. And once you explore the world of our film simulations, you see what I'm talking about. It's difficult to convince you until you actually try it yourself. I'm not saying you never shoot raw. There's always a place for it. If you're doing a wedding, you want to shoot raw because you definitely want to make sure you maintain all the detail in the wedding dress no matter what. But with mirrorless cameras, because what you see is what you get, you're almost never going to make an exposure mistake. So if you've got the confidence that your exposure is correct, all right, you can now start shooting JPEG more and more and more. Now, quick soapbox here is that a lot of people refuse to shoot JPEG because they think you can't do anything to it, and that's not true. You can manipulate JPEGs a lot. You just can't manipulate them as much as a raw file. And this is true of any camera manufacturer, okay? JPEGs are actually fantastically good, and they save you a lot of file space. They save you a lot of post-production time. So my challenge has always been, if you're new to the Fujifilm cameras, do this for a month. Shoot the raw and JPEG at the same time. You can do that. It's really easy in the menu. Shoot raw JPEG together. And then at the end of that month, go back and ask yourself, how many times did you actually use the raw file? And anyway, this comes back to the color management. Because we are a film company, we know how color reproduction is supposed to work. That's why the JPEGs are so incredibly beautiful, and it's why people have come to rely on them. So this is just sort of, I don't know what kind of screen you're looking at this at home. This is just sort of a smattering of the different, tonalities you can get with skin tones on the different film simulations. But we now have 19 different film simulations in our cameras. Now, so for those of you that still, are worried about raw file, want to shoot raw, our raw file is always 100% pure raw. There is no film simulation embedded on that. It's always the whole sensor. You can do whatever you want to it. But what's cool is you can shoot the raw plus JPEG. For example, I shoot a lot of black and white. I'm a black and white guy. So if I am shooting raw in JPEG, I will usually shoot a black and white JPEG. So what I see on the camera is a black and white image. I'm seeing that in my viewfinder, because I know that that's what I want. But that raw file is still there as a pure, raw, unprocessed image. So if for some reason I decide I want to make that picture in color anyway, I've got the raw file that I can fall back on. So the thing with all the film simulations is it only affects what you see in the viewfinder. It only affects the JPEG that comes along with the raw file. Our raw files are always pure, unadulterated raw files. And these are, I should say, actually, they were designed to be incredibly accurate reproductions of different film types, with the exception of the new one at the top that's called Nostalgic Negative. The new Nostalgic Negative is actually a combination of film and color paper printing from the late 1970s, early 1980s. So that one is a look of printed reproduction from colored films of that time. Everything else is based on film only. The one that's called Classic Chrome accurately, very faithfully reproduces a famous film from another film manufacturer that starts with the letter K. And that's what Classic Chrome is. And it looks exactly like that letter K film. We have in-camera conversion that's really, really fun and easy to do. So if you want to shoot just raw, but then you've been walking around doing street photography for a few hours, you want to pop into a coffee house, sit down and relax for a while, you can go in, start reviewing, pull up raw files in your camera, and you can go ahead and process them right there in your camera. So when you get home, you don't have to bother doing it. So you can do pushes and pulls, change the white balance, you can export TIFFs, you can export JPEGs, you can do all kinds of in-camera processing. That'll save you a lot of time later. We do have what we call the advanced filters. These are basically in-camera visual effects. You can do a lot of this stuff later in post-processing. But I got to tell you, once in a while, it's fun to just go kind of wacky and explore things that don't look the way normal. So you can do stuff in camera that gives you a lot of these interesting partial color and the soft focus, and gives you a lot of unique looks that, quite frankly, are just going to be more work later. Sometimes it's just fun to have to fart around and be different. So we've got a quick tour of what the physical layout of our cameras looks like. Any questions sort of on the image processing stuff so far? Nope.
I think we're looking good. No questions.
Okay, good.
You've got everyone totally enthralled.
So again, going back to sort of the retro origins of our cameras. Again, this is most of the cameras in our lineup. A few of these don't follow this, but if you look at the X100V, if you look at the top of it, you look at the X Pro, you look at the XE4, you look at the XT cameras, one of the things you'll notice is we have an actual real shutter speed wheel on the top of the camera, because this is the way film cameras were made. So you've got a rotating shutter speed knob, and you can set it to whatever you want. It's very easy. You can do it with your thumb, or you reach up and turn it this way, and you don't have to take the camera away from your eye. And you can use it in combination with the back wheel to fine tune the shutter speeds. Also, we have the exposure compensation wheel. So again, it's really easy with the camera up to your eye. If you're in auto exposure, just put your thumb on the exposure comp and dial it up and down. You don't have to hold down a button or anything like that to do it. It's really, really designed to be user-friendly and is super fast for street photography. If you don't want to use the knob, you can actually use the front or the back wheel on the camera to do shutter speeds if you don't want to do the knob, okay? We're not forcing you to use it, but it's there. Now, some of the cameras, some of the newer ones like the XS10 and the GFX100S, in fact, okay, you'll notice there is no shutter speed knob on here, okay? We did change to sort of the standard program shutter priority, aperture priority, manual type of mode dial on those cameras. And a lot of that was just simply to make migration easier for those of you that are in Canon, Nikon, Sony world that find that shutter speed wheel to be somehow foreign. I already mentioned the exposure comp. Function buttons. So everything that's on one of these cameras, all right, is a function button of one kind or another. So most of these, so everything has a predetermined default function when you take it out of the box. But if you don't like what this button here on the front does, you can reprogram it to do anything you want. And it's really, really easy. You just basically have to hold down one of the buttons on the back of the camera for 3 seconds. You get this pop-up menu that points to all the buttons on the camera, and then it gives you a list of, like, we have currently, most of the cameras are up to like 7 or 8 pages of different functions that you can choose. So it's real easy to set up the camera to make things turn on, make things turn off, or give you shortcuts to menu items in a very user-friendly way. The hot shoes in our cameras are standard ISO hot shoes. If you've got a flash from the 1960s, it'll work fine. It'll work fine. But then, of course, you can use dedicated TTL flash systems. So you can use our flashes, or you can use flashes from Godox, Profoto, Elinchrom, Metz, Broncolor. Did I leave any out?
Metz, Broncolor, Godox.
Yeah. So all the manufacturers have dedicated TTL systems available to use for Fujifilm. And with those systems, you can do high-speed sync as well. So you can get flash sync at up to 4,000th of a second with these cameras by way of the HSS high-speed sync. But for that, you need a TTL style flash, not a regular old-fashioned non-TTL flash. Focusing is very easy to control. Manual, continuous autofocus. Continuous autofocus works great. So you can either activate it with the shutter button, or if you want back button focus, a lot of the cameras have a dedicated AF on back button that's already there for you. The X100, it's a little sliding selector on the side if you want to go from manual to autofocus, like I said. And then most of the cameras now, we can move the autofocus point around by way of what we call the joystick. It's officially called the autofocus lever. But the joystick, you can, even with the camera up to your eye, you can move the focus point anywhere you want on the screen, or you can do it by way of the touch screens. We have touchscreen autofocus. So you can do that when the camera's on a tripod, or if you have it up to your eye, okay, you can just put your thumb on the LCD and slide it around and move things wherever you want. You can change the size of the autofocus box very, very easily. Again, you just push in that lever, the box turns green, and you use the wheel to make it bigger and smaller. We have choices just like other people, single point continuous, single point single. So single means when you half press the button, it will lock autofocus to that point. And there's wide tracking. We of course have autofocus tracking. We also have zone modes. So for subjects that are moving in an unpredictable way around the frame, you have wide coverage zone mode. So it will switch from point to point to help you track those things. The continuous autofocus is also really, really handy if you're shooting video. Put the camera on a gimbal and you use some of our really fast tracking lenses like our 23 f2 or our 35 f2 that have incredibly fast autofocus. It's really great to put the camera on a gimbal and shoot video with. I already kind of mentioned this. So again, you can choose the zone size. You can have 3 frames, 3x3 frames across, or 5x3 on some of them, 5x5. So you can make the zone bigger depending on what kind of subject you've got in the frame. The tracking will follow something. You tell it, you can touch on the screen to say, I want to follow this object, and the camera will track across the screen for you. The eye detection and face detection is very reliable. So you can choose with the eye detection, you can choose the left eye, the right eye, or have the camera decide for you. Some of the cameras like the X100V that have the fixed lens, so it will have an auto macro mode. So the camera will automatically switch into that if you get too close. The drive modes on our cameras are easily selectable either by way of a knob on the top, right? Or where's my X-T4? On the top, or by way of a button that will get you into a menu. Okay, but it's all very, very easily laid out. We have the advanced filter modes that I talked to you about. So that is a drive. You can flip in some of the cameras, you can flip the dial into advanced filter 1, advanced filter 2. There's 2 different choices. There's bracketing options that you can set up. The display back button lets you have a really busy screen if you want all kinds of info on the screen, or you can have it be completely 100% clean, that's picture only with no information on it. You can also customize the information you see on the screen. If you want a histogram on the screen, you can have it. If you don't, you can say, I don't want that. If you want a level on the screen, you can have it. If you don't, you can say, I don't want that. We try to be very, very user-friendly. This is sort of just a basic look of the way our menu logic looks. And we've got setup tabs, we have image information tabs. We have a Q menu. So all of our cameras, including the GFX 100s, have a button labeled Q, which is the quick menu. And this takes you to this easy to see graphically oriented screen that you can customize what's on there. So you can move those boxes around from one place to another, or you can choose different things to be on those boxes. And these would be sort of the most common things, the parameters that you want to choose. And it's just another way of you to getting to things. And you can, again, like I said, easily customizable. Our lens technologies are fantastic. We have been making lenses now for like plus 70 years. We have actually our own lens glass manufacturing factory. We make our own glass. We have pioneered the coatings that go onto the lenses. We OEM lenses for other camera manufacturers. They come to us for the glass. They come to us to make lenses. So coatings are extremely important, and we're very, very proud of them. You can see at the bottom why coatings are necessary, because coatings actually, you would think that they actually will hold back the transmission of light, but it's actually just the opposite. They make it possible to make more light actually get through the glass. We use also toughening coatings to protect the outside of our lenses. So that's what the nano GI coating is. So it's not only anti-reflective to make sure the light actually goes into the lens and doesn't just bounce off, but it protects the lens from actually getting dust and scratches. A spherical lens design, we use a lot of it. The good thing about an aspherical lens is they have complicated curve shapes to them. So they help to focus everything to a single point. And the ED glass helps minimize chromatic aberrations. So chromatic aberrations are the rainbow fringings that you get around areas of high contrast. So the ED glass that we make helps to get all the colors focused to the same point. This is sort of a close-up look of what our philosophy is on our different lenses. So some of them have the aperture ring that have f-stops marked on them. And they also have a position that's labeled letter A. So if you put the lens on the letter A, that means auto aperture. So that would be shutter priority. Some of our lenses, though, don't have the apertures actually marked on the lens. And there's a little switch on it that you can switch the lens to go from manual aperture control to auto aperture control. And these are just basically more of the kit lenses, just to make them a little less expensive. Some of the lenses have depth of field scales, and like I said, they have the sliding focus ring. And then we have switches on the lenses to turn the optical image stabilization on and off. Not all the lenses have optical image stabilization, but more and more of ours do. It's a mix of primes, it's a mix of zooms. But then again, we've got cameras like the XT4 and the XS10 and the GFXs that have in-body stabilization as well. So the sensor is being stabilized with the lens being stabilized on top of that. These are some of the acronyms we use when you're shopping for the lenses, if you want to know what that stuff means. A lot of our lenses are weather resistant, so they're not waterproof. But yeah, if you need to shoot in the rain, you can get away with it, okay? Our bodies, I forgot to mention, a lot of the camera bodies are weather sealed as well. So if you are shooting at the beach, you're shooting at the snow, you're shooting in dusty conditions, okay, you have, the hardware is protected. And then we have a remote app. We've gone through many iterations of that. They're both for Android and iOS. So you can actually fire the camera remotely from your cell phone. You can download images from the camera into your phone, and they work by way of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. You can change settings. Our cameras, almost all of them, have a built-in intervalometer, which is really, really handy for time lapses. Okay, so you don't need to have an external controller to do time lapses. It's right there in our camera menus, and it's featured on most of our cameras. And this is where I'm going to stop. We have been basically really, really well recognized for the fact that we do not abandon you just because we come out with a new camera. So we are constantly iterating new firmwares for both the cameras and the lenses. We still make firmware updates for cameras that were discontinued 5 years ago. So if we find a bug, we'll fix it. If there's a way to make something faster, better, easier, if there's a way to add a new feature like a new film simulation, we will put it out for you. And it's 100% free, and it's very, very, very easy to upgrade. So that kind of stuff in detail, if you want to know how we do that, join us next week on Saturday the 8th, and we'll actually show you the bells and whistles of, you know, the deep dive into the menus and any other kind of operational question you might have about our cameras. So, Lewis, have you been taking care of all the questions?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everybody was paying attention and nobody really had any questions. But I just fill in some comments.
Okay. Cool.
But if anybody who does have any questions, feel free at this moment to ask anything about lenses or bodies or software. But again, we are doing another class that we will probably take it to the next level on menus and like he said, like Michael said, firmware too.
Yeah, that one is going to be a little complex because we're going to try to address, we're going to try to address all of our cameras. So if you may have to sit through that, wait for us to get to the camera. If you may have a question about your camera, we might be answering something about somebody else's camera because the menus did change a bit. The time, it's next Saturday at
10 o'clock?
10 a.m. Yeah, California time. I don't know if you're all of you are from LA, but
Yeah, 10 a.m.
10 a.m. next Saturday, the 8th. Yeah. So sign up through the Samys EDU website. We'll be happy to answer all the nitty-gritty questions. So thanks for having us, Rui. Thank you, Samys. And I guess with that, we'll sign off.
Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your
Everybody,
time. Thank
Have
you,
a good night
Louis.
to everybody.
Thanks to everyone who joined in. Take
have a
care.
nice evening.
Take care.
Too.